Hi, Federico. Thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Nathan. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation. Yes, my name is Federico Ramos Taboada. I'm originally from Argentina, right now based in Florida, and worked at the same company as you right now. But wishing you the very best in your new endeavors, in this case with NASA. That's going to be really, really interesting.
What are some of your hobbies?
My hobbies, basically right now, I changed them, but I right now I'm really immersed with the VR stuff. I'm really looking forward to that. I want to see what's going on. So bought a famous company headset, and I'm exploring not only the games but also what are they doing on a socially from a social point of view, also from a work point of view. So that's really interesting. And I'm also catching up on some series that I had them written down in a in a Word document like a while ago when I started studying here in the US back in 2018, and I was never able to finish them. So I'm catching up with that. And one past hobby I'm not doing really frequently right now is reading, and and that can be because like work has been demanding, and probably the least thing that you want to do after work is like get into something, like where you have to also use your brain a lot. So I would say those are my three hobbies, and trying also to exercise a little bit, but that's kind of stable.
Well, I got a Oculus VR headset, and
Same.
I tried it out, and it was really amazing. I mean, you feel like you're like really there, but the same token, I really don't use it much. You like try it, and you're like, oh, this is cool, and then you go on with other things.
I agree. I think like the actual setup of these headsets takes time, and that actually, in order for you to start getting immersed into VR, you need to prepare the room. Sometimes you use it standing, so that's different from other stuff, and all of that attempts to foster people into the VR world, which some people would say that's actually good. You know what I mean? We have a wonderful world outside, and right now you're going to be working in further exploring not the world but even more outside. So yeah, it's the discussions that are going right now. Why go in VR when you can actually go out and explore?
Well, now coming to that and talking about a philosophical question, uh, some people, like Elon Musk, for example, says that if you look at the progression of like VR technology, it becomes more and more realistic. Like the graphics become so much more immersive. The sounds are there. You're having like situations where you can get like inside of this thing that you stand up and you could walk and run around. And the technology is continuing to advance to, and you can imagine at some point being in a place where you can't tell the difference between being in VR and being out of VR. Like, we're not, I mean, like what we have now is really primitive technology compared to what we need to make that happen. But just looking at the way technology progresses, you could imagine having such a situation. And then you could imagine having a VR situation where you'd want to go and maybe relive what the 20th century was like, or the early part of the 21st century. And so you could, have an apartment like what you have and have to go in cars and, all this stuff. And if such a point is in the future, you know, it's probably more likely that we're after that point than before that point. So, how do you know that the world you live in isn't just like a big VR game that you stepped into and you forgot about?
So I think you probably asked that question in line with the new Matrix that came out like in the last couple of weeks,
Oh, I
because that's
haven't seen
basically.
it. I
Oh, you
haven't seen
haven't
it.
seen it?
Uh-uh.
Well, I know this is recorded. It's not the best movie out there, but it's great that they revived a little bit the franchise, and I hope they delete this movie, but whatever. Going back, I think that's a great Matrix type of question where you don't know if you're going to be wired, if you're actually wired to some sort of like parallel world, and the actual world is, you don't even know it exists, but it's actually there. And I think that's part of the typical discussions they have in science, the unknown unknowns. Like how do you get there? You know, how is there a way of actually knowing something that is unknown, and that you also, even though it's unknown, you also are not aware that it's unknown? That's the question. And to answer your question is like, um, and getting philosophical here, I guess, is like quoting Descartes, that famous French philosopher. He wrote like a great book. I think it's called the Meditations or something like that. Like you can follow that path to find out that you're actually here instead of a matrix type of world. So yeah, but again, I think this type of questions are really applicable to other things, like applied in the astrophysics or even the technology itself. Like you mentioned VR before, and I think this kind of technologies are going to be judged eventually by how much, uh, I don't know how you measure this, but how much they increase not only productivity but happiness as a whole in society, and technology, because it's really expanding really fast. So for example, if we go back to the beginning of the 20th century, we have the car, great invention, fast and productivity, people could travel, airplanes, incredible. Like, then you have all the technology, and the computers, all of that. But then you start getting into a gray area, that I think it started with the social networks, and now with VR, where like it's getting gray in the sense that we don't know how much happiness that's going to provide the society. Perhaps productivity it will. We'll see how they do that. But that's a discussion I'm going to leave for historians and people eventually into the future. That, but yeah, like, in back to our conversation, like for example, space exploration was something really tangible that, some people actually don't see the benefit of it, but some others, even though I still need to explore, but for sure you, Nathan, more much know that I am. I think we see the benefit of actually doing that because it keeps expanding our possibilities and also realizing where we are. And as a fellow Cornellian, and with this, I'm going to finish the answer
Yeah,
to this really philosophical
Cornell.
question.
Uh,
Exactly. Carl Sagan, that famous picture he took from the Voyager 1, into the Earth, where you see like a little pale blue dot, as he named it, and then the light coming through and saying like, guys, don't take things really, really seriously because we are this in the universe. So all the wars, all the bad times, all the good times happen at that dot, and you are like not even like the size of the beam of light that is actually crossing. But yeah, like, I don't know if that answered your question a little bit.
um, well, it definitely provided some additional perspective. Uh, so, I think the question was, how would you know if you were in a VR situation or in the real world? And if the VR is good enough, maybe it's impossible to know.
Maybe it is, but again, like, if you haven't read it, like, I really recommend reading that Descartes book. I think it's called The Five Ways or The Five Meditations or something. It's a great, great book, that deals with his famous phrase was "cogito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am, and he proceeds with some like, philosophical and mental experiments on how to actually, realize that you exist and you are not wired. And then of course, he then goes into other more controversial stuff, as proving the existence of God or whatever, that then contemporary philosophers like, rejected it and provide their counter arguments. But at least the part where he tries to prove his own existence, it's really, really interesting. And I think it's meditation 1 and 2, maximum 3. So in case you don't want to read the entire book, it's a really short book though, like 100 pages.
I've just wrote down the list of books to read, so we'll get
Nice.
we'll get it read.
Nice. Keep me posted.
Okay. Um, so did you know that NASA is planning to send astronauts back to the moon for the first time since 1972?
Yes, and I loved it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there were some plans even before. I don't know if it was called the Constellation Program or something like that. And then the financial crisis hit the world and resources had to be reallocated, plus some other stuff I'm not aware. And then, yeah, it got pushed back. Um, NASA, on my end, I hope he's doing some sort of public-private partnerships here. I think the private sector has a lot to offer to place another person in the moon, like by 2024, while still having, of course, the NASA umbrella, which is like what we all know, and we all grew up, like with NASA from the movies, and that brand hopefully never ceases to exist. I think it's great.
Yeah, uh, I mean, Constellation made some great PowerPoints, great visions, but never really produced any hardware. At least with Artemis, we actually have a rocket that's about to be rolled out to the launch pad and tested. We have a capsule that's going to carry astronauts around the moon that's actually been built, and the next few have been built. You mentioned private public partnerships. For the landing system, they're planning to actually contract with a company to produce the lander, meet up with the Orion spacecraft, and take the astronauts to the surface and back. There were like 3 companies that were in the running in the last run, and they selected SpaceX to use their big Starship. So you have this low-body craft that's capable of carrying 4 astronauts to around the moon, meeting up with this huge craft that's capable of carrying 100 people, and then land on the moon, and then come back and meet up with them. So, and SpaceX has hardware they've actually built in Brownsville, Texas, near Boca Chica, near Brownsville, Texas. So it's not just PowerPoint. They've actually flown some stuff, and they want to fly some more stuff. So I think it's really kind of fascinating.
No,
But
absolutely agree, Nathan. And I really want to be there, experience when a new person lands. But again, this puts things in perspective. What was done in the 60s and 70s, it's simply unbelievable. Like putting people on the moon with hardware like what the power of like a really bad current calculator, or even less, or something like that. It's like, in a way, I know this is being recorded, but it's those people were nuts. You know what I mean? Like you were like sent into whatever it's gonna happen,
yeah,
and they still were able to do it several times. Of course, there were some accidents, whatever, but it was expected. You know what I mean? And having so many successes with the technology at that time blows my mind. And again, raises the question, like, why weren't we able to put someone else after 1972 there? And I hope with the new technology and the new capabilities, and also the private sector pushing down those prices, will help us, like after 2024, like, I don't know, who knows, maybe 2035, put someone on Mars, 8 months back and forth. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting.
you mentioned 2035. There's something else that was planned for 2035 for the longest time, and that was China putting people on the moon. But just a few weeks ago, they said that they think they could do it 8 years earlier, 2027.
Here we go again, another
and
rate.
the American program, was originally targeting 2024. Now that's been officially delayed to 2025. And some people think that it might be 2026, 2027, 2028. And so you're starting to see the Chinese program saying we could do earlier. They did the space station this year. They have some new launchers. They've like doubled their launch capacity in like the past few years. And then you have the American program taking longer. And at some point, it becomes a little less clear on who's actually going to be there first. And I was wondering, is that important? Does it matter if China makes it back to the moon before the Americans?
So, like, I'm not gonna get into China US type of conversations, but I'm not that kind of person that looks at China as like pure evil, or look at the US, of course, like pure good. Each country has its own priorities, cons, challenges, etc. So what China is doing, I think, it's going to help eventually the US program. And I'm going to use a tennis reference here. Federer, great player, but actually having to face Nadal and Djokovic made him much better, and vice versa. So having the Chinese like have their program or estimated launch like to the moon 7 years earlier will definitely help the US wrap up things earlier, and perhaps maybe not launch in 2025, but 2026 or maybe 2027. And who knows, Nathan, I'm being really optimistic here, if they launch in really similar years, if the US and China, with all their technology and capabilities combined, eventually launch joint missions into space, that actually helps settle the relationship between the two biggest countries in the earth. So who knows? Maybe space exploration ends up helping, like the world right now here, and also like the technological race here. It's going to be really fascinating to look at it. So I'm optimistic on that end. Like I know you were mentioning the US delaying their target and the Chinese going down, but I think they're gonna eventually converge to a year, because how much of a difference do the US and China have in technology advancements? I don't think that's too much. So they should. It's a matter of like, let's just go, guys, and let's do it.
Yeah, it'd be cool to have the the great handshake on the moon, or maybe they play soccer or something. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
The first U.S. Chinese lunar soccer match.
Yeah.
2v2.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. And I also want to see what Russia and Europe is gonna do after the US and China start wrapping up. They're putting a man again in the moon. That's going to be really interesting. And at the same time, I'm also going to be really interested in what the people against these programs are going to say. You know what I mean? Like, why let's focus on the world, or we have other problems here. Why go to the moon? It's the typical discussions that that probably the NASA had to deal with, like in the past 30 years or more.
The interesting thing is, if you look at from 1969 to now, we have double the population in the world, right? So that means double the number of brains. Like we should be able to, like, we could take literally half of the world and focus them on a problem that wasn't even possible before, theoretically.
Agree. And we have also the proof of concept. The US already did this in the 60s and 70s. Like, it's not like we're like, hey guys, let's go to Pluto and whatever, because that also raises social questions, like, why are you sending astronauts to their death? You know what I mean? Kind of the things that probably were not raised back in the 60s and 70s due to geopolitics and the excitement of actually having someone in the moon. But I think, as you mentioned before, like, we have the proof of concept. This was done before. We have the technology much better, and we have more brains. And you're going to be part of one of those in the coming days. So I'm being really optimistic here on this scenario.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. We have more brains for spaceflight, but I was talking about those other world problems. Like, why are we sending people to space instead of taking care of global warming, or poverty, or environmental issues, or health issues? And we have the brains for it, but for some reason they're more concerned about which stock price is going to go up, or who to vote for, instead of actually solving real problems.
Yeah, I guess that's the financial issue there, in the sense that the biggest brains are actually going to really short-term industries. But again, I'm also really not confident, I will be optimistic again, that eventually the system corrects itself. And somehow humanity already did a lot of like awful predictions regarding global warming. There were people in the 60s saying that in the 80s we were going to be burning. The same in the 90s. You know what I mean? It's like, eventually we're not perfect, of course, but we eventually realized that we are not doing things correctly, in order not to use another expression. And we get together and we actually solve it. So I think we evolved there, and technology will certainly help. Like, for example, hunger. There's a lot of developments in synthetic food, and actually synthetic food with a lot of minerals, even more enriched minerals. A lot of efforts are being done with pollution. You already mentioned one of them, Elon Musk, trying to bring everything back to electricity. Then the revival of nuclear energy again. Like, people are starting to realize, like, hey, nuclear is really, really productive, and if you take care of it, it's really safe as well. Let's forget about Chernobyl. Let's forget about nukes. Nuclear doesn't mean that. And we will eventually like solve these issues again. And with the added benefit, as you mentioned before, that we have extra people to think about, like, hey, let's think beyond. There might be interesting things to do in the moon, perhaps Mars, who knows.
Yeah, if anything, new insights, new perspectives. I mean, there's one thing seeing the pale blue dot there's a completely different thing being standing on the moon, holding your thumb up in front of you and covering up the entire Earth. That I think has a very different emotional impact.
Oh yeah, and we realize how small we are, and again, quoting Carl Sagan, like how we should take things less seriously and be nicer to each other in a way. But yeah, like hopefully, like maybe later in our life we have some sort of affordable way of actually heading to space, even if it's for 5 hours, to see that. That would be amazing. We'll see like if that happens in the next 40, 50 years, who knows.
Now, you said you knew that we were planning to send people to the moon, and you even talked about the Constellation project. I was planning originally with this project to actually go interview people at coffee shops, on the street, at the stores, you know, at the airports, and I've done that. In fact, all my interviews from like December to March, when the pandemic happened, were all in person. And you know, I've been able to start interviewing people on the street again. I was down in Mexico City. I got to interview some people on the street. That's kind of neat. But of the people who are not space people, I would say that the vast majority of them, feels like around 80%, have no clue that we're going back to the moon. And I was wondering if in your world, the people you talk to, if you get a sense that they're aware of it and excited about it, or they don't know about it, or maybe they're aware of it and against it. I'm not sure. Well, tell me about the people you know.
So yeah, I'm gonna answer that, and I'm gonna really thank, in this case, my dad. My dad is an engineer, mechanical engineer in this case, but he was always interested about like space and everything. He loved the 60s and 70s in the sense that he's always saying like what we did there as a whole race, you know, like a humankind was incredible. So he was the one who gave me, when I was like really young, a book called The Adventure of the Atom, which I read, which is like how they like from back in from the Greeks until the atom was actually discovered. Like you go through all of the physicists and else on how they actually discovered it. And from there, later on again, he gave me another book that I still have it, and also subscribed me to a famous magazine called Scientific American, and the book is called E equals Einstein, where I started continuing reading about this stuff. And this was when I was 15, 16. So when I was about to graduate from high school and decide what I'm going to do with my life, I was between being a physicist, a philosopher. I really like philosophy. And then I end up being like in something in between, which is an economist. So that you use math at the same time you have philosophy point of views, whatever. But I proceeded with that. But I never stopped reading about these things. And yeah, I think like my conversations with my dad, also people I met here in the US, even people that I have friends from Argentina that are also following this stuff because they're more into that type of industry. We're always keeping updated, and this big news, perhaps they appear only once in a newspaper or in a portal, but then you never forget about them, you know, like, hey, Constellation, now Artemis, we're placing someone else in 2024. Now I just realized China by 2028. You never forget about this stuff because those are dates that you're eagerly waiting for. If you already had the passion, thanks to my dad and thanks to my friends, regarding astrophysics, astronomy, etc.
So how come you switched to economics instead of sticking with physics?
So I think it was those type of conversations that relate to one of your previous questions, Nathan. But I want to say a disclaimer first. I'm not part of those great brains that I mentioned before. You know, like you want to have the most intelligent people, like hopefully, of course, because it's a matter of personal choice. Let's not get into telling people what they have to do. Hey, go to be a doctor, be a physicist, be an astronomer, you know, go. But then eventually, I guess, at least in Argentina, because we're a different country than the US, you start evaluating your job opportunities outside. So you ended up going into more of a ground where you can play safe, at least initially. And I think that's what, when I don't remember my internal conversations when I was 17 or 18, but I said like, okay, I love physics, I love math. Let's bring it to an economist level in the sense that an economist needs to know about history, philosophy, math, I'm not a philosopher, of course, because there's really limited jobs there available. So I think, unfortunately, that was the reason I chose economics. I really like economics, but I think eventually I'm going to regret not studying physics and trying myself like in that field. But hopefully other countries like here in the US where opportunities are more abundant, or perhaps China, or maybe, who knows, Russia, some developed countries in Europe are helping people like myself that are debating themselves between like a safer bet, which are riskier but perhaps more interesting at that time when you're debating what to do. I don't know if that helps with the answer. It's a really philosophical answer as well.
I would just kind of comment on one thing about the great brains and whether or not you're in that category or not. I would say Einstein was not Einstein when he started.
Yeah. But I think, no, you have a great point, of course. And we don't know what's going to happen with all of us. And that's actually great news, because your past doesn't determine your future. But yeah, I wouldn't compare myself with Albert, just in case for now.
Well, not at the end. I mean, it's like looking at Usain Bolt and seeing how fast he runs. You know, he didn't start out running that fast. Like there is a process he went through that produced that, right? And you know, it's like I'm there's going to be some fundamental Federico theory that's going to come out at some point. I know it.
I'm hoping more for Nathan theory right now, because what you're actually doing, Nathan, I think that's really fascinating. I don't know if I should be saying this in a recorded video, but actually leaving your job career right now, that you were actually being super critical for the previous organization you were working, and you're also having like a lot of responsibilities, people in charge, you were a manager, and actually saying like, hey, I'm really passionate about this. I'm gonna start as an entry level one, start from scratch. And I think that's something that more people need to know about it. Like, hey, perhaps you played the safe bet back in the day, or you didn't even know what you wanted, but there's always a time in the future, and doesn't matter the age, where you can actually say like, I'm stepping back a little bit and I'm restarting again, and I'm actually doing something that I always wanted to do. So I think kudos to that. I think when I read that in your email, I was like, wow, the entry level part. I was like, knowing you that you're really smart, I was like, okay, perhaps he's going into the Artemis program or something, not in the Artemis, but eventually as a sort of manager or coaching someone regarding whatever. And then I read like, no, I'm starting entry level, and it's like, wow, that's bold. That's a classic Nathan type of move, I think.
Yeah, I know that came up a whole bunch of times in the interview process, but I think it's a good place to start. That way I can fill in all the blanks. Well, Federico, I know we're at the kind of at the last minute. One quick question: if it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip to space?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you told me like, hey, we're leaving tomorrow, I'm going.
You're going.
Yeah,
How
I'm
far
going.
would you go? Would you go to the moon? Would you immigrate to Mars?
Well, Mars only if I'm with the right people. That's a long trip. I think, how much is it? Is it like 8 months one way, or 4 months? So it's 8 months one.
Yeah, I think it's like 4 to 6 months there, and then you have to stay there for about a year and a half, and then 4 to 6 months back.
Okay, so this is a really long time. You have to go to with the actual appropriate people. And reaching the moon is like what, 4 days?
Yeah, 3 days,
Yeah.
in fact. Yeah.
Send me to the moon, leave me there. It doesn't matter. As of now, of course, Mars, I think I'm gonna leave it to more professional people. um, but yeah, no, if you told me like, hey, we're leaving tomorrow, kind of the trips that we have been seeing, in this case, like Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, whatever, or hopefully, who knows, like some other people who is like giving away tickets to go to space, and I happen to be one of those, I'm actually going. Yeah, not afraid. I really want to see that. It's amazing. So yeah, count me in if you happen to have an extra ticket eventually in the future.
I hope I'm in an opportunity, a position to do that at some point.
Oh, I think you will do it. I'm not 100% about me, but I think you will do it, Nathan. Just provide NASA all the great work you have been doing with the countdown to the moon, and I think they will realize that all your passion deserves a trip to space, at least for it. It's for a day.
Thanks for a day. Well, thank you so much, Federico. You have a good rest of your day, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you again for everything you've done for me, and the best of luck with everything. Let's definitely keep in touch.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.